I left that house with a thin plastic bag and the smile of a woman who had just been saved. But inside the bag, I did not have clothes. I had evidence. For 2 years. My son believed I had no one left but him, and his mistress believed I had no voice strong enough to ruin them. Today, they will learn that silence is not weakness. Sometimes it is a trap. My name is Evelyn Marlowe. I am 58 years old, and for 3 decades, I worked as a senior auditor for the Northbridge Compliance Bureau. My job was to look at rows of perfect numbers and find the one digit that did not belong. I was an expert at uncovering the lies people told on paper, but I was blind to the lie living in my own guest bedroom. I lived a quiet life in Briar Hollow, a town where neighbours knew the license plate numbers of every car on the block. After my husband passed, I convinced myself that my son, Caleb, was the only anchor I had left in this world. Caleb Marlowe was handsome in the way politicians are handsome, polished, smiling, and entirely hollow. He came to me with stories of bad luck in the market, of investments that were just about to turn a corner. I helped him, of course. Mothers always help. But I did not know he was drowning in debt that no amount of motherly love could pay off. And I did not know about Tessa Vance until it was too late. She was his new partner, a woman with eyes like a calculator and a heart made of cold ledger entries. She moved into his life, and soon enough, they were rewriting mine. The campaign against my sanity began with small, calculated strikes. Caleb started rewriting history. We would be having coffee, and he would look at me with manufactured concern. Mom. We talked about this for 20 minutes yesterday. Do you really not remember? I would check my calendar. Confused, my hand hovering over the date. I had always been sharp, but he was relentless. If I left my reading glasses on the side table, he would move them to the refrigerator. When I could not find them, he would pull out a small black notebook and make a note. It is getting worse, isn't it? He would whisper to Tessa, just loud enough for me to hear. They were building a narrative. They were turning a grieving widow into a senile burden. Then came the accident. I slipped on a spill in the kitchen water that I was certain I had not dropped. My ankle twisted, and I went down hard. It was a simple sprain, the kind you treat with ice and elevation. But Caleb acted as if I had broken my hip. He dialed a number, his voice rising in artificial panic. She fell again. I can't watch her 24/7. We need help. The doctor who arrived was a friend of Tessa. He did not look at my ankle as much as he looked at the furniture. He wrote a report stating I was a danger to myself and required immediate, full-time supervision. Tessa made her move the next morning. She sat across from me, sliding a stack of documents over the polished wood of my dining table. Evelyn, this is just to help you, she said, her voice dripping with fake syrup. If we get temporary guardianship, we can protect your assets from scammers while you are in the recovery center. You know how people target the elderly. I am not elderly. Tessa, I am 58. Of course. She smiled, thin and tight. But the courts, they need paperwork. Just sign here. It is just for your medical admission. I looked at the papers. The print was small. My ankle throbbed, clouding my judgment. I trusted my son. I looked at Caleb, but he was studying the floor. I signed. I signed my name. And with it, I signed away my freedom. The night before they took me away, I was lying on the sofa in the living room. The pain medication made me heavy, but my mind was beginning to clear. The house was dark. I heard them in the kitchen, Are you sure this will hold up? Caleb asked. His voice was shaking. The judge won't look twice, Tessa replied. She has a documented history of confusion now. The doctor signed off. I feel sick. She is my mother. Do you want to lose the house? Do you want to be on the street? Tessa hissed. Because that is what happens if we stop now. There was a long pause. I lay frozen, my heart beating so hard I thought they would hear it through the wall. Just keep her quiet for 2 years, Caleb said, his voice barely audible. 2 years. And everything is ours. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. 2 years. They did not want to help me. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to park me in a facility until the statute of limitations on their theft ran out, or until I simply ceased to exist. My first instinct was to scream, to storm into that kitchen and demand answers. But 30 years of compliance work stopped me. You do not shout at the fraudster when you find the discrepancy. You wait. You gather evidence. I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing. I decided then and there to play my part. I would be the confused old woman. I would be the victim they crafted. Because the arrogance of a criminal is their greatest weakness. They thought I was broken. They thought I was safe. They had no idea that while they were planning how to spend my money, I was already planning how to spend my time. The house by Crowline Lake was not a sanctuary. It was a tomb with a view. The air inside always smelled of cheap lemon floor cleaner and damp wool, a scent that stuck to the back of my throat no matter how much water I drank. They called it a recovery retreat, a place for me to rest my ankle and regain my strength. In reality, it was a holding cell with decorative iron scrollwork over the windows. The bars were painted white to look charming, like something from a country cottage magazine, but I knew what they were. I tried the front door on my second day. The deadbolt was double-keyed. There was no latch on the inside, only a smooth metal plate. When I asked for my phone, Caleb patted my hand with a patronizing softness that made my skin crawl. Mum, the doctor said screens overstimulate you, he said, his voice dropping to that practiced, concerned whisper. We are keeping it safe. You just rest. I learned quickly how the trap worked. It was not built on steel, but on perception. One afternoon, I heard voices in the front yard. I dragged myself to the window, peering through the white iron bars. Caleb was talking to a woman walking a golden retriever. It is heartbreaking, really, Caleb was saying, shaking his head. She wanders. Last week she tried to walk onto the highway in her nightgown. We had to install the special locks to keep her safe from herself. The neighbor looked up at my window with pity. I wanted to scream that I was sane, that I was a prisoner, but my tongue felt heavy and thick. That was Tessa's doing. The pills came 3 times a day in a little plastic cup. They called them vitamins and muscle relaxants for my ankle. But I knew the fog that rolled in 30 minutes after taking them. It was a grey, heavy blanket that made my thoughts wade through mud. I would start a sentence and forget the end of it. I would try to stand, and my knees would buckle. They were chemically engineering the very dementia they claimed I had. My jailer was a woman named Marla Hinton. She was not cruel. She was worse. She was indifferent. She sat on the sofa for 8 hours a day, scrolling through her phone, looking up only to ensure I was breathing or to hand me the little plastic cup. Time for your meds, Mrs. Marlowe, she would say, her eyes never leaving her screen. I do not want them today, I managed to say once, pushing the cup away. Marla just sighed, the sound of someone inconvenienced by an unruly toddler. Evelyn, do not make me call your son. You know he gets upset when you are difficult. She did not hate me. She just wanted her paycheck. I was a job, nothing more. Caleb visited every Sunday at 2 o'clock. He brought groceries and fresh flowers. He would stand in the entryway, right where the red light of the newly installed security camera blinked, and he would hug me. I hope you are eating well. Mum, he would say loudly, clearly for the benefit of the recording. Tessa and I miss you so much. He would hold the hug for exactly 5 seconds, then pull away, his eyes instantly cold. He never stayed longer than 15 minutes. It was a transaction. He was building an archive of evidence to show a judge. Look at the loving son. Look at the well-cared-for mother. I realized then that they did not need to tie me up. They had tied me up with a story, to the world. I was the tragic, declining mother. And they were the saints, sacrificing everything to care for me. Who would believe the woman behind the bars when everyone already knew she was losing her mind, but boredom breeds observation? I spent hours staring at the objects in the house, looking for cracks in their system. In the kitchen, pushed into a corner behind a toaster, sat an old radio. It was a cheap, black plastic model from the early 2000s. One morning, while Marla was in the bathroom, I ran my hand along the side of it. My finger bumped against a small slot. A slot for an SD memory card. It was old technology. Forgotten technology. But it was a recording device. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a sliver of a chance. I moved to the stack of mail Marla had carelessly left on the dining table. Most of it was junk, but near the bottom was a thick manila envelope. I pulled it out. The return address was a legal clerk in the county court. I slid the papers out, my hands trembling not from drugs, but from rage. It was a copy of the petition for guardianship. I scanned the legal jargon until my eyes found the filing date stamped in the corner. August 12th. I froze. August 12th was 3 weeks before I fell in the kitchen. 3 weeks before my ankle twisted. Oh, Caleb. I whispered to the empty room, a cold fire igniting in my chest. You did not just take advantage of an accident. You planned it. I heard the toilet flush. I shoved the papers back into the pile and sat down, staring at the radio. They thought they had buried me, but they had forgotten that even the dead can listen. I began to keep a ledger in my mind. In my old life at the Northbridge Compliance Bureau, I lived by the principle that chaos is just a pattern you have not deciphered yet. Here, in this cage of floral wallpaper and locked doors, the chaos was chemical. The pills were designed to strip away my internal clock, to make morning bleed indistinguishably into night. But I fought back with the discipline of 30 years in auditing. I found anchors they could not confiscate. The garbage truck rumbled past on Tuesdays at 7 in the morning. The shadow of the oak tree hit the edge of the rug at exactly 4 in the afternoon. I counted these events like rosary beads. They were my proof that I was still here, still Evelyn, and not the ghost they were trying to turn me into. One evening, I decided to test their confidence. I took my pills, but I held them under my tongue until Marla turned her back, then spat them into the soil of the potted fern by the window. I slumped on the sofa, letting my mouth hang open slightly, feigning the deep, drug-induced sleep they expected. Minutes later, the front door opened. Caleb and Tessa walked in, their voices low but careless. They thought I was unconscious, a piece of furniture with a pulse. I kept my breathing shallow and rhythmic, listening with every nerve ending. "The lawyer says we are close," Tessa said, the sound of heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "But we need to solidify the narrative. Forgetful is not enough anymore. Caleb, we need incompetent. We need danger to self." "I don't know," Caleb replied, and I heard the clink of glass bottles. He was drinking. "The neighbours are asking questions." "Mrs. Gable asked why Mum never comes out to the porch anymore." "Let them ask." Tessa snapped. "I have a contact in the Central Medical Records System. We can backdate a few reports. Make it look like a rapid neurological decline. By the time anyone looks closely, the paper trail will be so thick they will never find the truth. It is all about the paperwork. Caleb." My blood ran cold. This was not just a family betrayal. This was a network. Tessa was not acting on instinct. She was following a playbook. "And the money," Caleb asked, his voice greedy and anxious. "We can keep drawing from her main checking account as a care allowance for now," Tessa said. "But the real payout is the house in Briar Hollow. Once the guardianship is permanent, we sell it. The market is hot. We could clear 400,000. Easy. I already switched her bank statements to a P.O. box in the next town." Caleb muttered. "She hasn't seen a balance sheet in 2 months." I lay there, paralyzed by the enormity of the theft. They had redirected my mail. They were draining my life savings under the guise of caring for me. But the biggest revelation came a moment later. A detail that clicked everything into place like a key in a lock. "You are sure this judge will buy it?" Caleb asked. "Honey, I work at Alder and Wren Legal Services." Tessa laughed, a sound devoid of humour. "I manage the administration for 3 guardianship lawyers. I know exactly what the judges look for, because I am the one who usually types up the petitions. I know where the cracks are, and I know how to seal them. Alder and Wren." The name burned into my memory. She was an insider. She knew the system because she was part of the machine that stripped the elderly of their rights before they left. I heard one last exchange. Marla, my indifferent jailer, walked into the room. "She's been out like a light since 6, Marla reported. "But she was agitated earlier, kept asking for a pen." "Don't give her anything sharp," Tessa commanded. Then came the sound of paper shuffling, the distinct crispness of fresh currency. "Here is the bonus for this week. Make sure next week's report mentions that she was hallucinating. Can you do that?" "Sure," Marla said, her voice brightening for the first time. "Whatever you need." The door closed, locking me in again. I opened my eyes in the darkness. They were buying my insanity with envelopes of cash. They were selling my house before I was even dead. They thought they were writing the final chapter of Evelyn Marlowe, but they had made a critical error. They assumed that because I was silent, I was defeated. I looked at the dark outline of the radio in the kitchen. If they wanted to build a prison out of lies, I would build a key out of the truth. I would not just survive this. I would record every word, every bribe, and every betrayal. I would let them testify against themselves. I treated my captivity like a complex audit. In the absence of freedom, I found purpose in protocol. The cheap plastic radio in the kitchen became my vault. During the day, I would slide the SD card out of the slot and tape it to the underside of the kitchen sink, a place Marla never looked because she never cleaned deep enough to reach it. I needed a backup for my passwords, but I had no paper that would not be discovered. So, I took a framed photograph of Caleb and me, taken 10 years ago at a beach picnic, and on the back, using a dried-out ballpoint pen that left no ink. I etched the login credentials into the cardboard backing. You could only see them if you tilted the frame against the light at a specific angle. It was invisible to the naked eye, but legible to the desperate one. My behavior became my camouflage. I learned to let my mouth hang slightly open. I delayed my responses by 5 seconds, staring blankly at the wall before answering a question. "Mom, do you want tea?" Caleb would ask. I would count to 5 inside my head. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tea. Is it morning?" I would stammer. It worked. They stopped whispering. They began to speak at normal volume, assuming the woman in the room was nothing more than furniture. They discussed transfer fees and court dates right in front of me, filling my SD card with every incrimination they uttered. But recording was passive. I needed to make contact. I studied Marla's routine with the intensity of a predator. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, she would unlock the back door, step out onto the small patio, and smoke 2 menthol cigarettes. I timed her for 3 days in a row, 12 minutes. She was outside for exactly 12 minutes. On Thursday, the moment the latch clicked shut behind her, I moved. My ankle screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I went straight to the utility closet in the hallway. The Wi-Fi modem was blinking on the top shelf, the network key printed on a sticker on the bottom. I had no pen. I looked around frantically. I saw a strip of blue painter's tape peeling off a cardboard box of old books. I ripped it off and, using my thumbnail, I pressed the letters of the password into the soft adhesive. I did not write them. I embossed them. I limped to the living room credenza where they had shoved a pile of junk from my house. Buried under old magazines was a cracked tablet, an old model I used to play solitaire on years ago. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I pressed the power button. The battery icon flashed red. 7%. "Come on," I whispered, my hands shaking. "Please. Just give me 5 minutes." I typed the password from the tape. My fingers, fumbling. It connected. The screen lit up with notifications from years ago. I opened the browser. My old work email. A secondary account I used for sensitive compliance reports was still logged in. I did not dare write a letter. A letter took too long. I hit compose. I typed in the address of Dana Kessler, my attorney from years ago, a woman who was as sharp as broken glass. Subject: help, do not call. Body: just a single dot. A blank message sent from an IP address that was not my home, with a subject line that screamed, "Emergency." I hit send. Then I deleted the sent mail. I deleted the trash. I had 3 minutes left. I pulled the pill bottles out of my pocket, the ones Tessa had relabeled. I lined them up on the table next to the guardianship papers I had stolen from the trash. I took photos. Click. 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 I logged into a cloud storage account I had created for archiving tax returns. I created a new folder. I named it EM-2Y. Evelyn Marlowe. 2 years. It looked like a tax code to anyone else. I uploaded the images. Then I wiped the tablet's gallery and history. I shoved the tablet back under the magazines and sat down on the sofa exactly 10 seconds before the back door opened. Marla walked in, smelling of smoke and cold air. "You okay, Mrs. Marlowe?" she asked, tossing her keys on the counter. I think I missed my show," I mumbled, staring at the dark television. "It is not on yet," she said, dismissing me. I survived the day, but the night brought a new terror. Caleb and Tessa arrived late. their mood electric and tense. They did not even greet me. They stood in the kitchen, pouring wine. I sat in my chair, the recorder in the radio silently spinning. "The judge is reviewing the file on Monday," Tessa said, her voice tight with anticipation. "We have the doctor's note, the neighbor's statement, and the incident report from the fall." "And if she talks?" Caleb asked. "She won't." Tessa sneered. "Look at her. She barely knows what day it is." She turned to look at me, and for a second, I thought she saw the fire in my gut. But she only saw the old woman I pretended to be. 2 weeks. "Caleb," Tessa whispered, raising her glass. 2 weeks until the court signs the permanent order. Once that gavel bangs, she is ours, and she will never be truly free again. The word never hung in the air, sharp and final. They thought it was a promise of their victory, but to me, it sounded like the starting gun. I had 12 minutes today. Tomorrow, I would take back my life. Trust is a currency I had stopped spending. In a world where my own son had sold me for a down payment, the idea of relying on a stranger felt like walking onto thin ice. But survival is not about safety. It is about calculated risk. My potential ally was not a hero in a cape. He was Jonah Pike, a delivery driver for the local grocery service who looked barely old enough to shave. He came every Tuesday and Friday, hauling crates of bottled water and bags of flour into the kitchen, while Marla ignored him to watch dating shows on her tablet. I noticed Jonah because he noticed me. Most people look through the elderly as if we are glass. Jonah looked at me. He frowned when he saw the new deadbolts. He paused when he saw me sitting in the same chair, wearing the same grey cardigan, staring at the front door like a starving dog looks at a butcher shop. "You doing okay today, Mom?" he asked one Tuesday, wiping sweat from his forehead. Marla scoffed from the living room. "She's fine. Just put the water down." I did not answer him verbally. Instead, I waited for Marla to look down at her phone. I had prepared a scrap of paper, torn from the corner of a magazine subscription card. On it, I had written a single, dangerous sentence if I said I was held against my will. Would you believe me as I walked past him to get a glass of water? I let the paper flutter to the floor, landing right next to his muddy boot. I did not look back. I just prayed he was not one of them. He returned on Friday. The tension in my chest was so tight, it felt like a physical bruise. Jonah carried the groceries in, his face unreadable. He set a box of produce on the counter. When he leaned in to stack the apples, he spoke, his voice a ghost of a whisper. "If you want, I can leave a pen and an envelope inside the next box. Just nod." I nodded. It was a small gesture, a tiny bridge built over a canyon. He did not promise to break down the door. He offered a pen. It was practical. It was real. The following Tuesday, the exchange happened. I had removed the SD card from the radio, the one containing the recording of Caleb and Tessa conspiring to sell my house. I had wrapped it in a tissue. When Jonah placed a bag of flour on the counter, I saw a bulge in his pocket. "I think this bag is leaking," he said loudly. "Let me double bag it for you." "Ma'am." Marla did not even look up. Whatever. In the 3 seconds it took him to adjust the bag, I slid the tissue-wrapped card into his hand, and he pressed a small, hard object into mine. It was a cheap flip phone, warm from his pocket. "I used to work at a nursing home," he whispered, his eyes dark and angry. "I saw what the kids did to their parents. The guardianships. The theft. I know the look. Mrs. Marlowe. I know the look. I hid the phone in the waistband of my skirt and retreated to the bathroom. My hands shook as I dialed the number I had memorized a lifetime ago. Dana Kessler. My old lawyer. A woman who wore suits like armor and treated the law like a weapon. She answered on the second ring. Kessler. Dana. It is Evelyn. Evelyn Marlowe. Do not hang up. Do not use my name. There was a silence on the line, then a sharp intake of breath. Evelyn! My God! I got an email with just a dot. I thought it was spam until I traced the IP. Where are you? I am in a house near Crowline Lake. Caleb. Caleb and his girlfriend? Tessa Vance. They have locked me in. They are drugging me. They have filed for guardianship. Tessa Vance. Dana's voice turned to steel. I know that name. She works for Alder and Wren. Evelyn, listen to me closely. This is not a family dispute. This is imprisonment and fraud. We need to get you out, but we have to do it right. If we rush and they have a doctor saying you are incompetent, the police might leave you there. We need a welfare check from a neutral party, someone who can testify that you are lucid. I have evidence, I whispered, pressing the phone to my ear as I stared at the bathroom tiles. I sent a memory card out. Recordings. Good. I will get it. I am going to file an emergency petition for a welfare check and a suspension of the temporary guardianship. But I need you to stay alive until I can get a judge to sign it. Can you do that? I can do anything. Dana? I just need to know this ends. It ends. She promised. I am coming for them. I hung up and hid the phone inside the hollow cavity of the toilet tank, wrapped in 3 Ziploc bags I had stolen from the kitchen. I felt lighter, stronger. But that evening, the burner phone vibrated against the porcelain. I retrieved it later to read a text from Jonah. They just put up a new camera on the porch, facing the driveway, and a motion sensor. You have to pretend you are getting worse. They are getting suspicious. Be safe. I stared at the glowing screen. They were tightening the noose just as I was reaching for the knife to cut it. I flushed the toilet and walked out, letting my shoulder slump, dragging my left foot. If they wanted a helpless old woman, I would give them an Oscar-worthy performance. I would play the victim until the exact moment I became the executioner. The air in the house changed. It was no longer just stagnant. It was vibrating with the high-pitched frequency of paranoia. My son arrived on a Wednesday, 2 days earlier than his schedule allowed. He did not bring flowers this time. He did not bring groceries. He burst through the front door with the frantic energy of a man who feels invisible eyes watching him. He went straight to the kitchen cabinets, ripping them open one by one. I sat at the table, my hands folded over a placemat, watching him destroy the order of the room. He was looking for the radio. Perhaps he had realized it was missing, or perhaps his guilty conscience had whispered that the old device was listening to him. Where is it? He snapped, spinning around to face me. The radio. The black one that was behind the toaster. I blinked slowly, letting my mouth hang slack. I had to sell the lie better than I ever had before. I had to be the ghost they wanted me to be. Radio, I asked, my voice trembling and weak. I haven't listened to music since your father, since he left. Caleb stared at me, searching for a crack in the mask. I held his gaze with a vacant, watery stare. He let out a curse and kicked the cabinet door shut. He did not find it because I had buried it deep inside a bag of frozen peas in the freezer 2 hours ago. But his suspicion was a dangerous thing. Tessa was more calculated. She saw Caleb's panic and countered it with cold precision. She stopped bringing the pills in the little cup. Instead, she stood over me, watching me swallow them, checking my mouth like a prison warden. She leaned in close, her perfume smelling of expensive vanilla and rot. "You know? Evelyn," she whispered, her voice like silk over a razor blade. "If you continue to be difficult, we won't be able to keep you here. There are state facilities, places with white walls and no windows, places where no one listens to a word you say because everyone knows you are just a screaming, delusional old woman. Do not make us send you there." It was not a threat of violence. It was a threat of erasure. She was telling me she could delete my existence. The pressure mounted. Marla, my indifferent guard, had been bought. I saw the thick envelope Caleb slid across the counter. Suddenly, the woman who used to ignore me became a hawk. She installed child-proof locks on the pantry. She swept the house and confiscated every pen, every pencil, and even the knitting needles I had found in a drawer. She checked the trash cans 3 times a day. My tools were gone. I felt like a soldier stripped of his rifle in the middle of a battlefield. One night, the cruelty peaked. Caleb sat across from me, his face shadowed by the dim light. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red. He was drinking whiskey from a coffee mug. "Mum, just sit still," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You just have to sit still. If you make this hard, I will make you look like you have lost your mind completely. I will rewrite your whole life until you don't even recognize yourself." I looked at the son I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, and I realized he was gone. In his place was a desperate creature willing to consume me to survive his own mistakes. So I gave him what he wanted. I let my hand shake violently as I reached for my water glass. I spilled it, letting the cold liquid soak my lap. I stammered. I am sorry. I didn't mean to." Caleb exhaled, a sound of relief. He thought he was winning. He thought I was breaking, but the cracks were forming on their side too. Later that night, I lay in the dark, listening to them argue in the hallway. The volume rose. "You said this would be clean?" Caleb hissed. "It is clean, you idiot. Keep your voice down." Tessa shot back. "Do not call me that." "Veronica, I am the one taking all the risk here." I froze. "Veronica." He had called her Veronica. It was a slip, born of anger and alcohol. But it was the key to the entire cage. Tessa Vance was a fiction. Veronica was the reality. I filed the name away in the vault of my mind, repeating it until it burned. I needed to tell Dana. I needed to send this name out. I waited until 3 in the morning, when the house was silent. I crept to the bathroom, my heart hammering against my ribs. I reached into the toilet tank, feeling for the plastic bag that held the burner phone. My fingers brushed the cold porcelain. I reached deeper. Nothing. I froze, the blood draining from my face. I groped frantically in the water, searching for the familiar shape of the Ziploc bag. The tank was empty. The phone was gone. I stood up, trembling in the darkness. Someone had found it. Was it Caleb? Was it Tessa? Or was it Marla? Silently collecting leverage of her own, I did not know. All I knew was that my lifeline had been cut, and somewhere in the dark, a clock was ticking down to a hearing that was only 9 days away. The loss of the phone felt like an amputation, but it sharpened my remaining senses. I became a creature of pure observation, hunting for the smallest mistake in their armor. Tessa was arrogant, and arrogance is sloppy. She left an express mail envelope on the kitchen island, assuming I was too far gone to understand what I was looking at. I shuffled past it, my eyes locking onto the label. The addressee was Tessa Vance, but the tax identification number printed in the small box at the bottom did not match the format for an individual. It matched a business entity. And the business name listed in microscopic print was not Alder and Wren. It was V. Hale Consulting. I memorized the string of numbers instantly. It was a reflex from 30 years of auditing. I had no pen. So I went to the bathroom and used a tube of old lipstick I had hidden in a rolled-up pair of socks. I scrawled the name Veronica Hale and the tax number onto a square of toilet paper. The next morning, when Jonah arrived with the groceries, I was ready. Marla was distracted by a phone call in the other room. I moved to the door as Jonah set down a crate of oranges. "Take this," I whispered, pressing the soft tissue into his hand. "Tell Dana. The name is Veronica." Jonah nodded, his face pale. He looked terrified, but he closed his fist around the paper. 2 days later, Jonah returned. The air around him felt heavy. He carried a box of detergent to the laundry room where I was pretending to fold towels. He did not look at me, but he spoke fast and low. "Your lawyer checked it," he murmured, keeping his back to the door. "Tessa Vance is a ghost. The real person is Veronica Hale. She has outstanding warrants for guardianship fraud in Nevada and Arizona, and she owes a lot of money." He paused, glancing over his shoulder. "And Mrs. Marlowe?" "There were 2 men at the dispatch center yesterday. They weren't cops. They were asking where Caleb lives. They asked if the cash cow was still breathing. Caleb isn't just stealing from you. He is being hunted." The puzzle pieces slammed together with a sickening clarity. Caleb was not just a greedy son seduced by a mistress. He was a man with a gun to his head, and I was his ransom payment. The desperation in his eyes wasn't love or sorrow. It was the panic of a man who owed a debt he could not pay. That evening, I found the mechanism of their theft. Caleb had left a folder on the coffee table while he argued with Tessa in the yard. I opened it. Inside were bank transfers from my retirement account. Thousands of dollars moved to a company called Lakeside Home Care LLC. It was a shell company. There were no nurses. There was no care. They were laundering my life savings through a fake business to make the theft look like medical expenses. But the most chilling discovery was on a notepad next to the folder. It was a sheet of scratch paper covered in ink. Tessa had been practicing. She had written Evelyn Marlowe over and over again, but she had not written it normally. She had intentionally added a waver to the lines, a jagged shake to the letters to mimic the handwriting of a woman with advanced neurological decline. She was forging my consent, and she was forging my weakness. I closed the folder just as the back door opened. I sat back, staring at the blank television, my heart cold as stone. I had the name, I had the motive. I just needed to survive until the hearing. However, survival was not part of their plan. Later that night, the house was dark. I was lying in bed, fully dressed under the covers, when I heard footsteps stop outside my door. "The hearing is in 3 days," Tessa whispered. "If she walks into that courtroom and speaks, we go to prison. Caleb. Not just for fraud, for kidnapping." "I know," Caleb replied. His voice was a dry rattle. "We can't let her get in that car." Tessa insisted. She won't, Caleb said, and the flatness of his tone made my blood freeze. On the morning of the hearing, Mom isn't going to wake up in time, and if she does, she won't be able to walk. I will make sure she stays here, even if I have to tie her down myself. They were not planning to argue their case. They were planning to ensure the plaintiff never arrived. The hearing was meant to be my liberation, but they intended to turn it into a default judgment. I lay in the dark, my eyes wide open. They thought the lock on the door was enough. They did not know that I had already unlocked the truth about Veronica Hale. And they did not know that a cornered mother fights harder than any debt collector they could ever fear. I stopped waiting for a rescue. I realized that if I wanted to leave this house, I had to force the door open myself. Dana had given me the strategy through an encrypted message before I lost the phone. She called it a neutral touch point. If I could get myself in front of a doctor or a social worker without Caleb hovering over my shoulder, the narrative of my dementia would crumble under the weight of my lucidity. But I needed a reason to leave. I needed a medical emergency that was undeniable but survivable. I stood at the stove, watching the steam rise from the kettle. Marla was in the living room, laughing at something on the television. I did not hesitate. I took a deep breath, calculated the angle, and poured the boiling water over the back of my left hand. The pain was white and blinding. It seared through my nerves, instantly shocking my system. I screamed, not because I was acting, but because my skin was burning. I let the kettle clatter to the floor. Marla, help me. I cried out, clutching my wrist. Marla came running, her eyes wide with panic. She saw the red, blistering skin and the puddle on the floor. She froze. Liability is a powerful motivator. If she did not call for help, and I got an infection, she would be negligent. Oh my God. Evelyn. Why were you touching that? She yelled, fumbling for her phone. I have to call 911. She made the call. It was the first time in 6 months that an outsider was summoned to the house. When the paramedics arrived, Marla tried to speak for me, babbling about how clumsy I was, how I forgot things, but she could not stop them from loading me onto the stretcher. In the back of the ambulance, the doors closed, shutting out the house and the lies. The paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes, began applying a cooling gel to my hand. It is going to be okay. Ma'am, she said softly. We will get you something for the pain. I looked at her. I dropped the slack-jawed expression I had worn for weeks. My eyes became sharp and clear. I am not confused, I said, my voice steady and low. I am being held against my will. Please, do not call my son. The paramedic stopped, her hands hovering over my bandages. She looked at my face and saw the clarity there. What did you say? My son and his girlfriend have imprisoned me, I repeated, speaking with the diction of a compliance officer. I have no phone. I have no access to my accounts. Look inside my blouse. There is a piece of tape. She hesitated, then peeled back the collar of my shirt. Taped to my skin was a strip of masking tape with Dana Kessler's number written in marker. Call this lawyer, I commanded. Tell her Evelyn is out. By the time we reached the hospital, the dynamic had shifted. I was placed in a private room. A doctor and a hospital social worker came in. They expected a senile woman. Instead, they got Evelyn Marlowe. I recited my social security number, the current president, the date, and the exact address of the house where I was being held. I explained the medication schedule Tessa forced on me. The social worker took notes, her frown deepening with every sentence. Then came the storm. Caleb and Tessa arrived. I heard them in the hallway, their voices raised in performative concern. "Where is my mother? She is terrified of hospitals. You have to let us see her," Caleb shouted. They burst into the room, but the social worker stood between us like a shield. "Mrs. Marlowe is being treated," the social worker said firmly, "and she has requested that no family members be present during the assessment." "That is ridiculous," Tessa snapped, stepping forward. She was wearing her caring daughter-in-law costume, a soft cardigan and sensible shoes. She has severe cognitive decline. She doesn't know what she is saying. I manage her care. I manage her medications. "Is that so?" the social worker asked, glancing at her clipboard. "What is she currently taking?" Tessa didn't blink. "She takes donepezil for memory and lorazepam for anxiety. 50 milligrams. The room went silent. The social worker looked up, her expression cold. 50 milligrams of lorazepam would put a horse into a coma. Ms. Vance and Mrs. Marlowe's blood work shows no trace of memory medication, but it shows high levels of a sedative that isn't prescribed to her. Tessa's face went pale. The mask slipped. For the first time, she had tried to improvise a script in a room she did not control, and she had failed. Caleb looked at her, panic rising in his chest. They were not writing the story anymore. Dana filed the emergency petition within the hour. The judge granted a temporary suspension of the guardianship pending the investigation. The hearing was still on for tomorrow, but I would not be missing it. I would be there, sitting in the front row. That night, lying in the hospital bed with a police officer stationed outside my door. I borrowed a nurse's phone. I sent a single text message to Jonah, the delivery boy who had been my only link to the world. "Tomorrow. Don't save me. Watch them burn themselves." The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a scent that reminded me of my old life in compliance. Caleb and Tessa sat at the plaintiff's table, a portrait of filial devotion. They had brought 3 thick binders of fabricated medical history, and Tessa was holding Caleb's hand, rubbing his knuckles with a soothing rhythm that I knew was for the benefit of the judge. They looked exhausted, grieving, and noble. They were ready to bury me under a mountain of pity. Then I walked in. I was not in a wheelchair. I was not wearing the stained nightgown they had forced me to live in for 6 months. Dana had brought me a crisp navy blazer and slacks. I walked to the defendant's table with a steady, measured gait, ignoring the burn on my left hand. When I sat down, I looked directly at Caleb. He flinched. His eyes widened, and the colour drained from his face as if he had seen a corpse sit up in a coffin. He nudged Tessa, but she was too busy arranging her papers to notice the predator entering the room. "Case number 4922, regarding the guardianship of Evelyn Marlowe," the bailiff announced. Tessa stood up immediately. She was representing herself, leveraging her legal background. "Your Honour," she began, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "We are asking to seal these proceedings. Mrs. Marlowe is suffering from severe paranoia and agitation. We are terrified that the stress of a public hearing will cause a psychotic break. We just want to protect her dignity." "Objection," Dana said, not even looking up from her notes. "Mrs. Marlowe is not paranoid. She is angry, and she has every right to be." Dana walked to the bench and slapped a thin file onto the wood. "This is a psychiatric evaluation conducted yesterday afternoon at County General Hospital. It confirms that my client is fully oriented to time, place, and person. Her cognitive score was 30 out of 30. She is not incompetent. Your Honor, she is a hostage. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, flipped through the report. She looked at Tessa, then at me. Mrs. Marlowe. The judge said, "Do you understand why you are here?" I stood up. I did not hold the table for support. I do, Your Honor, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. My son claims I am confused because it is easier to steal from a confused woman than a lucid one. I am not confused. I am locked in. The silence that followed was absolute. Tessa's jaw tightened. She leaned over to whisper something to Caleb, but Dana was already moving. Your Honor, the petitioners claim they installed locks and cameras to keep Mrs. Marlowe from wandering, Dana said, pulling a poster board from behind her table. But here is a GPS log from a grocery delivery truck. It shows that for 6 months, Mrs. Marlowe never stepped foot outside the house. And this photo? She pointed to a grainy image of the new camera. Shows a security camera pointed not at the doors to monitor a wandering patient, but at the driveway to monitor visitors. They were not keeping her in. They were keeping the world out. That is circumstantial, Tessa hissed, losing her composure. She is a danger to herself, is she? Dana asked. Or is she just an inconvenience? Perhaps we should let the petitioners explain this. Dana pulled a small laptop from her bag and pressed a key. The audio from my memory card filled the room. The quality was tinny, but the voices were unmistakable. Just keep her quiet for 2 years is all we need. That was Caleb. The report is ready. I have a contact who can backdate the medical history. That was Tessa. The recording echoed off the high ceilings. It was the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. But this time, they were the ones inside. Caleb stood up so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. No, that is... She took that out of context. He stammered, his hands shaking. He turned to Tessa, his eyes wild. You said this was legal. You said you handled the paperwork. Tessa recoiled, pulling her hand away from him as if he were burning. Me, she shrieked, her voice cracking. I am just the administrator. You are the one who drained her accounts. Caleb, you told me she agreed to it. You are lying, Caleb shouted, pointing a trembling finger at her face. You set this up. You knew about the judges. Order. The judge banged her gavel. The sound like a gunshot. Order in this court. But the damage was done. They had torn each other apart in under 10 seconds. The facade of the loving family lay in ruins on the floor. The judge looked at them with a mixture of disgust and fury. The temporary guardianship is immediately suspended. She ruled, her voice cold steel. I am ordering a full forensic accounting of Mrs. Marlowe's assets. And bailiff, do not let Mr. Marlowe or Ms. Vance leave this building. I am referring this matter to the district attorney for immediate investigation into false imprisonment and fraud. Caleb slumped into his chair, putting his head in his hands. Tessa stood frozen, staring at the exit sign. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply gathered my purse and turned to Dana. Thank you, I said quietly. I was free. The law had done its part. But as I looked at the back of my son's head, I knew the court's punishment was not enough. They had taken 2 years of my life. I was about to take everything else. The legal battle was over. But the ruin had just begun. Caleb walked out of the courtroom with the swagger of a man who thought he had survived a car crash with only a scratch. The judge had suspended the guardianship. Yes. But in his mind, we were still mother and son. He thought this was a domestic dispute, something he could smooth over with a few apologetic dinners and a sob story about his gambling debts. He did not know that I had not just come to court to free myself. I had come to bury him. He approached me near the metal detectors, running a hand through his hair. "Mom, look." "Things got out of hand," he said, his voice dropping to that familiar, wheedling tone. "But we are still family. We need to figure out the assets. The house needs repairs. And I still have access to the joint accounts to help you." He reached for my arm. I stepped back, my movement sharp and precise. I turned to the police officer standing next to Dana and handed him a small, heavy brass key and a USB drive. "Officer, this is the key to a safety deposit box at Northbridge First National," I said, my voice steady. "And this drive contains a ledger of every transaction made from my accounts over the last 24 months. You will find they match the deposits in my son's hidden offshore accounts to the penny." Caleb frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his face. "What accounts? I manage your finances. You signed the power of attorney. You managed a decoy," I told him. "Years ago, when I worked in compliance, I set up an irrevocable living trust. It has a specific trigger clause in the event of documented guardianship abuse or incapacity. All primary assets freeze and transfer to a charitable holding company. You are not the beneficiary. Caleb, you never were. You have been stealing from an allowance account that ran dry 3 days ago." His face went grey, the colour of wet ash. Dana stepped forward, holding a sheet of paper like a blade. "We also have the forensic analysis of the medical documents you submitted. The signatures are forged. The home care company, Lakeside Home Care, does not exist. The district attorney has already issued a freeze on your personal assets. Mr. Marlowe, your credit cards were cancelled 10 minutes ago. You cannot run." Caleb's eyes darted to the glass doors of the lobby. He was looking for Tessa. He was looking for his co-conspirator to fix this. But Tessa, or rather, Veronica Hale, was already being introduced to her own reality. Through the glass. We saw her sprinting toward the parking lot. She made it 10 feet before 2 federal marshals stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. They did not ask nicely. They tackled her against the hood of a sedan. The warrants from Arizona had finally caught up. Caleb watched her get cuffed through the glass. He turned back to me, tears streaming down his face. But they were not tears of remorse. They were the tears of a child who realized the game was over and he had lost. "Mom," he choked out, his voice cracking. "Do you want me dead? Is that it? You want to ruin my life?" I looked at him. I searched for the little boy I used to read bedtime stories to, but he was gone. In his place was a stranger who had looked at me for 2 years and seen only a dollar sign. "No," I said softly. "I just want you to live with the consequences. That is the only inheritance I have left to give you." I handed the prosecutor the final piece of the puzzle, the memory card from the radio, the recording of Caleb admitting to locking me up to get the court's approval. It was a confession. Clear as day. The officer stepped forward, pulling the handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked, a sound far more final than the lock on my bedroom door. "Caleb Marlowe, you are under arrest for false imprisonment, elder abuse, and grand larceny." The press had gathered by now. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of the son being led away from the mother he tried to erase. A reporter thrust a microphone in my face as I walked toward the exit. Mrs. Marlowe. Do you feel like you got your revenge today? I stopped. I looked directly into the lens. I am not taking revenge, I said. I am putting the truth back where it belongs. The ride back to Briar Hollow was quiet. When the taxi pulled up, the house looked different. The bars were still on the windows, but they looked fragile now, like relics of a war that had ended. I walked up the steps. I reached into my purse and pulled out my keys, my own keys, returned to me by the court. I unlocked the door. The sound of the tumbler clicking open was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Inside, the house was silent. The smell of stale medicine was fading. I walked to the credenza where Caleb had hidden the mail. I found one last envelope, sealed but never sent. It was addressed to Tessa. I tore it open. After Mom disappears, everything will be clean. We can sell the lot and move to Cabo. She won't be a problem anymore. I did not cry. I did not scream. I smiled. A cold, satisfied smile of a woman who had audited her life and balanced the books. I placed the letter into the evidence folder for the detective. Then, I walked to the front door. I looked out at the street, at the free world, and then I stepped back inside. I closed the door. This time, I was the one turning the lock. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you folks are tuning in from. So please drop a comment down below and share your thoughts on Caleb's punishment. Did he get what he deserved? If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video reach more people. Stay safe out there, and remember to check your locks.